So there you go, water,
Excellent. Look at that.
and then
Solid.
get you a.
Oh yeah.
Might want to sluice it out quickly. I'll give you a bit of
Oh, I see what you mean.
doesn't get used as often. Sorry, I have hit record, so this is on,
Oh, we're good.
on the thing, but just
This is the start. Let's go. We're at the beach.
back in the van today, so this
We're
is
literally at the beach today.
exactly.
Fruits with water. Did you sauna this morning?
I did sauna this morning.
I could
so
tell.
Gym,
Very
sauna, gym, sauna, ocean. Sitting in a van
All those
next
toxins.
to a bunch of people doing
left.
Tai Chi.
I noticed that.
Yeah, like it's
Tempted to go join them.
Well, you're gonna have to update the video now, so there's like a couple of people over
Doing Tai Chi.
to the side here just doing Tai Chi.
A couple of septuagenarians doing Tai Chi.
So I was gonna, I had some, we haven't done it, but I had some like pre-prepared, like authentic starter chat earlier.
Oh God! All right.
Which is, no, I was thinking about AI the other day, and like one of the things I'm trying to do at the moment is think about like how does it impact the kids?
Oh yeah.
And I thought, oh, this might be interesting to talk about, which was
Like in what
like,
way?
what do they do?
Yeah.
like when they're older, and like how do you prep them for
Yeah.
something like this? And so what I've been doing, because we've had like a bit more time on our hands in the last couple of weeks, having sort of a project come to an end, and then like sorting out the next thing. And one of the like the little things I'm doing with the kids now is to figure out, all right, I've got a bit of time. Let's develop a business together. And the idea is, can I create a business that utilizes AI and shows you how to use it, but at an early age just shows you that you can make money.
Yeah.
You can make money on the internet. I thought it's interesting that as an adult, like almost any like opportunity you look at, you need a pretty high payoff to make it worthwhile for whatever it happens to be. Whereas I thought, you know what, for the kids, like if I could, like, you know, my daughter's 8, and it's like, right, if I can get her $1,000 online, that is going to absolutely change the trajectory of her life.
Yeah. Exactly.
Going forward, she's going to be like, what the fuck? I can get money out of thin air by doing stuff online, and I can just do that, can I? And it's fine.
Yeah.
And so we're doing a business at the moment, which is called Teddy Fashion Boutique,
Oh yeah. Nice. Okay.
which is an AI first online haute couture
Wow.
teddy dressing service, where you can kind of like you use like a set of AI agents to basically take a brief like on the type of designs that you want and how to dress your teddy, and then it generates this little, I didn't know this was a thing, but a lookbook. There's like this two-page spread that explains like a little bit about your teddy, and then there's like a little hero shot of them, and then like the different outfits that we've chosen and descriptions of them, and then there's like a picture of your teddy going into a wardrobe, like picking out from all the different outfits are in there,
Yep.
and like the different seasonal variations that you might have. And on the next side there's like 5 pictures of just your teddy like dressed up in different situations with
Nice.
these things.
Yeah.
I was like, I would buy this.
Yeah.
I'm trying to teach us like, look, I would buy this for like,
You know what you need?
I might buy this for like $20 for a PDF, but I would probably buy this physical for about $50.
Yeah.
I would buy the clothes for like $100. Like, and I was like, I think there could be a business here. I was like, this is
I
fun.
think what I want is, I've got a bunch of teddy bears, right? And I want the ChatGPT image gen API built into this, so I can take a picture of my teddy and then go, how will my teddy look in these items of clothing? And I want it to just like do the image and painting.
This is what we've got. So we've been prepping the product. So we've like done the layout for the lookbooks and how it's going to be made, how we're going to do like the physical creation of the things. And we're talking through like the whole process. She's got like a little brand kit that she's put together. Like she's getting really into it, which is quite it was quite fun. And then I was like, right, well, the next bit is I'll register the domains and we'll actually stand this up as a service.
Yeah,
but, like, so the first thing you've got to do is like, we'll create some physical versions of this, and you take them into school and see if you can sell like one. See if like one friend says, "Oh, I'd love something like that." And then if we can do that, then we've probably got a business here. But
Yeah.
I reckon you could. I think it could work.
Probably more successful than other stuff. It's probably
It could be.
I think you've like touched on something that like, I was thinking about this the other day for a LinkedIn post. Like, what do you teach your kids?
Yeah.
You know, but the answer is probably, well, anything. You know, because I think about what I do, and I'm like, you know, obviously we talked about this last week, using AI to learn how to code, but I've also been like using it for trying to get back into playing guitar a little bit, because I always felt like I hit these roadblocks.
I wonder what that guitar was doing in your house.
Yeah, it just
like,
collects dust mostly. Yeah, it's the kind of thing I
thought
like
the
to show
wall was
off.
like
Yeah.
slowly falling down or something.
But it's you do tend, especially when you're learning as an adult, you tend to run into these choke points that you don't intend to recover from, because sometimes you're just like, I'll move on with life. It gets in the way, and it prevents you from necessarily like knocking down those barriers. And I don't know, I just feel like there's like an easier way to just overcome those now with AI. I can just like ask a question to this language model straight away, or I can take a photo of something and go, what is happening here? Tell me what I'm doing wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's obviously really good informationally, but then also from a technique perspective, you know, like I took a photo of like how I was essentially forming a chord progression, and just asked it to tell me like, what do you think of this? Now, to be honest, I haven't been able to validate those outputs, because it said it was fine. And I'm like, well, it doesn't feel fine.
So the nail polish is a bit weird.
Yeah,
but
yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're missing a little pinky, but like, let's not get in. But I'm not a medical doctor, so I can't give you any advice. But yeah, I think the answer might just be, it almost doesn't matter so long as you're learning and you're using it to just skill max, essentially. And it doesn't even mean that you need to be building skills because you want to go and build a career or get a job, or you just need to be following your own kind of curiosity, your own intellectual curiosity to a degree.
I feel like that's very similar when we used to talk to Paul Stackwork around. He would often say, like, you just need high agency kids that can do stuff and are interested and are different. That's like, you know what? I think there's a lot to be said there. Like the bit I quite like as an idea, instead for Karis, would be, you know, again, if I can teach you at 8 that you could make $1,000, like, you're just not going to be scared about this. This is just going to be normal to think.
Definitely.
That, like, I can just do whatever I want. I can invent a job. I can invent Teddy fashion, and then I'll make some money. I don't know how much.
Yeah.
And like, that would be a great result if we can get it going. And it has been fun.
Yeah, completely.
Like, I've enjoyed it.
I mean, the stakes do raise as you get older, right? There is a kind of linearity to this, because life gets more complex. You tend to become more risk averse.
You have bills.
You've
you
got
have people
housing,
like reliant
kids.
on you.
Yeah.
It's like the biggest regret is that I didn't just go straight into this at the age of like 18.
I mean, my unlock was doing this as a teenager, like making my first money, essentially permissionless. Because it like embeds something in your mind that even if you go through like a prolonged period of failure where you're not able to replicate that financial success, it almost doesn't matter, because you've done it previously, so you remember. It's like muscle memory was formed early, so it's like I believe I can do it again.
Yeah,
you know, it just takes reps and iterations. But I think the longer you leave it, I think the harder it becomes, because you also have this like ingrained set of kind of logic and process and expectations built. Like, it's nurtured, right? Because you've gone through like enterprise structures, and you almost lose that curiosity and that creativity that you need to just go blank slate, first principles. Let me build something from scratch here. Let me follow a thought or an idea down a path, or create a new path to build something.
Yeah, I mean,
It's pretty liberating,
isn't it? But it's fun. So like the other one I think is permission.
Yeah.
Like, you feel like you can't. That you can't do this. Like, can I just be this guy that does this? And it's like, yep. Like, that's how it all works.
Yeah.
Like, there's no.
Exactly.
Like, you don't have to like overly credential yourself in these areas. Like, a lot of those things are just kind of a little bit of nonsense. You can just become like the thing. Or like the person who's the best at this in this area. Is like, you just need to go and do it.
Well, it happens all the time, doesn't it?
It does, but that was probably like the bigger thing for me of leaving generally like enterprise, big corporate stuff, was just like, oh shit, like, can I how do I prove that I can do that? And it's like, well, you just do it, and then like the first person won't give as much of a shit, and then like once you've got more case studies, that builds. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite so recently I was updating my my Twitter profile because I don't use it, and I really should, because we've actually got a lot of content to push out, so I should use it more. And so I updated my little bio, and I was trying to think on this for the longest time, like what's the pithy line I could create here that sums up my existence in 100-odd characters. That's obviously really difficult. But do like it came back to being permissionless, right? Because that, I think, is the trend line that I've kind of had mapped through my entire working life. Has just been, how can I be permissionless? How can I go and build a business, even if it's just a small business, even if it's part of a small portfolio? It's just designed to do one little thing. It doesn't have to retire me. That's just me following my intellectual curiosity to see if I can build a thing. And so that's what I decided on for Twitter, for X, and it's building a permissionless life. Because it's always a work in progress as well, right? Because it's easy to fall back into these traps of seeking permission. It's usually an employment paradigm, right? It's there are authority structures that I have to operate within. So, can I just go and do a thing, or should I seek permission from someone that I work with before I can go and do that thing? And that's because there's a risk animus. That's how we make our decisions in the workplace. But it's interesting tangent to set us off on.
Welcome to Good Stuff. There you go.
Episode 4.
It's the official intro.
We made it.
Episode 4. Yeah, it's good. I remember Tim Ferriss back in the day used to say you got to do at least 6 episodes of a podcast before you really get into it, and then if you get past that, then often you'll keep it going for a while. But it's kind of hard. This is the valley of death, I'm sure, that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, probably.
I am aware that people are listening to this because some people are sending me questions about it, which is kind of cool, which I enjoy. But so we said we were going to talk today about the intelligent assembly line. Yes. So more about how do we actually do some of the stuff? So I do quite like that we've gone, what's the business model of AI? What's the value trap? How does it play out? It feels like we're stepping through, and what was it, buy versus build in the last one. So we're kind of stepping through from the start about how do you think about this? What are the opportunities? What are the risks to look at? How would you position yourself at a kind of allocation level? And I think towards the end of the last episode, we said, we haven't really talked too much about, all right, well, now you are the owner of a business. You're not looking to buy a business, you're not to start something necessarily. What do you do with your current business? How would you go about this? And that's where we were going to get into the intelligent assembly line. So I think there's probably a few different ways we could get into it.
Why don't you just tee it up, describe it top level. So the irony here is that we're going to go back 100 years and talk about Henry Ford, aren't we?
Oh yeah, I can't remember my rant about that. But yeah, I think there's an interesting analogy, right? That I think it was in 1913, so 110 years ago. Henry Ford. I always just say Gerald Ford. What isn't he? He's a very different guy. But yeah, Henry Ford invented the assembly line, and what's really interesting about that is he took something that was a difficult artisan task. There wasn't something that you could just do with a machine, but he broke that task down into a lot of subcomponents.
Yeah.
And in breaking it down into these subcomponents, he could then just arrange those one after the other, and any particular subcomponent was a lot simpler. And so all of a sudden, you no longer needed artisan crafters to produce the car. It could be produced by almost anybody with lower levels of training, lower levels of skill, but just working in this structured manner on one tiny piece of the whole.
Yeah.
And then it just hugely changed the cost base and efficiency of that whole business and the construction of cars.
Yeah.
And then just had the flow-on effect of just completely changing society and work for millions of people.
Can I give you 2 stats?
Yeah. Okay.
So it took workers 12.5 hours to assemble a car previously. That was reduced to 93 minutes.
Okay.
And in 1914, so it's like what,
It's
a
almost
year
like
later.
a 10x reduction.
Yeah. So like a year later,
In one go.
the
Yeah, okay.
production rate from Ford, which was like, 308,000 vehicles, eclipsed the number of like vehicles produced by all of the other manufacturers combined. It's about a year
Wow.
later.
Wow. That's okay. I wasn't aware of those stats. Like, I think I was broadly aware of the impact of the assembly line, but hadn't really thought about it.
And so the price of the Model T eventually dropped to like about $260. That was in 1924, so maybe like a decade later.
So it probably is an interesting parallel there. Then.
Yeah.
Did he grow his market share when he did that?
I'm guessing so.
that would kind of play back into the value trap model, right? Of just like what happened here was that he became like the car company that owns the market there for a while, and then competition came in and pulled it away. So it's interesting. Yeah, that's very good analogy. I hadn't thought about it that way.
That and like if we think about how we work today, it's the 5-day week, 8-hour day. Is essentially a byproduct of that bit of industrialization, the factory labor component from the assembly line. We still do that. I don't know that we've really thought about why we still work that way from a knowledge work perspective.
How big's the truck?
Yeah, exactly. That's it, right? I mean, I think that's, if anyone's missed that, go back to last week. We asked the question, why does the truck need to be that big? That is the key question. Like, why have we continued this paradigm for knowledge work, which is essentially a byproduct of the automotive assembly line that Ford's created here, and obviously like created the $5 a day, those kind of things. There's a bunch of like societal byproducts to this as well. That was quite interesting because it led to some uptick in consumerism as well. That increase in daily pay rate. There's obviously queues of people wanting to work at Ford at the time, and then obviously having a little bit more disposable income. The second order effect is that they can
I'm
go
slightly
and-
unaware of this.
Yeah.
The idea was that because they could get much better output, they could afford to pay more for the people that came in. So they actually increased the wages.
Well, the average I think at the time was about $2.25 for a 9-hour work day.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think the work day, reduced by an hour, and then essentially over doubled the pay rate for the day. So you had like a queue of people. I think there was one day where like 10,000 people showed up at a factory looking for a job. That was in 1914. So
that's not intuitive to me, right? Like I would have, if you'd have said to me what was the impact there, I wouldn't have said that workers got paid more.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because that does beg the question: does a similar thing play out with the intelligent assembly line, right? Where you've got access to so much more profit that why wouldn't you just have the best people working for you that you can? So maybe like the people that can get those jobs, it does go up for the salaries of the jobs that remain.
It was even more problematic because the Smithsonian did a piece on this, right? That's what I was reading last night, and so Henry Ford had to hire about 52,000 workers for his primary workforce in the factory, but at that time he only had about 14,000, a pool of only about 14,000 people to choose from. So, that creates a problem. So I think there are a lot of parallels here to perhaps what we're going to see with the intelligent assembly line. So maybe that's like a nice jump off point for you to pick that back up. But I just thought, let's dive back into, let's explore this in a bit more detail, because I think the Henry Ford angle is like always a bit of a throwaway for us. It's like a play on words, but actually there's a bunch of societal and business impacts here. I think we'll dovetail back into it at times because there's just so many cool anecdotes from that period. But yeah, I think let's provide a bit of context here for.
Yeah. So I mean the intelligent assembly line, the idea is very similar to what we just talked about. Is that we currently look at a lot of creative work and knowledge work in this same way as being it's very artisanal. Like it has to be like a human that's doing this thing. It's not like a mechanistic process that we're going through. And I think that's largely just history and inertia, is that it always has been that. we didn't have a different option for doing the work in a different way. We had to do it with a human. And I think because you put it into a human is a certain size and has a certain amount of time and ability, and you have to buy them in units of one. Part-time work exists, but it's even then you still it's a big chunk of human that you put into it. So you tend to then also group a bunch of tasks under that bucket of this is what a person does in their role. And I think what that does is it makes it look like it's this just skill that's innate almost to the person and the individual. And then I think the process that we're about to go through is that we've now got this different container of intelligence that we've talked about a few times, which is AI. And it's something that you can buy in units of 1 cent instead of 100 grand, right? And that is going to have a change on how we do the work. But at the moment, all the work is packaged in a way that it fits inside human beings, in human processes, and human org charts. And so there's a lot of stuff that's kind of munged together. So to me, the intelligent assembly line process is okay, well, how do we go about unpacking that? And saying so for this person's job, this person would actually maybe do 1,000 things over the course of their job, and we need to start enumerating those. And we need a plan for how do we begin to do that? Where do we start? What's the biggest bang for the buck that we could do? Do we need to know everything that they're doing inside their head or not? Where do we draw the line? But generally what you want to do is take jobs and existing processes that you have and start to break them down into smaller and smaller components so that you can pull the Henry Ford trick. And then you can say, okay, well, now I don't need to be quite as intelligent to do this. Because there's a certain level of intelligence for one person to be able to do all 1,000 things. For the person to be able to train to do the one thing, it's probably a set of context, some knowledge, some examples of how you would make the decision, and then the decision that needs to be made. And that you can code for. Yeah. And particularly you can code for that quite nicely with LLMs and AI workflows at the moment. So I think the simpler way to understand it is take a big complex process and task and break it down into much smaller components than you would have done for people. And then the benefit that you get of that is that each one of those becomes much easier to automate using LLMs.
Yeah. So the kind of the existing paradigm was the human is the form factor for intelligence. The business exists to do a thing, and in order to do that thing, we'd throw more humans, i.e. more intelligence, at that problem, at that process to produce that thing. And what we're saying is that the cost of that intelligence is about 100 grand. It's pretty expensive.
Yep.
And that intelligence is constrained because humans are inherently constrained, right? They only work a certain number of hours in the day, they get tired, they get sick, they have a bunch of individual characteristics that might give them certain proclivities toward either productivity or maybe being less productive at times. There's a whole bunch of
I'm a bit human that
variables. Yeah, of course. And it's not necessarily a permanent state, right? You might feel more productive one day and less productive another day, and that's fine. There are these vicissitudes that exist in our kind of standard operating procedures as humans. And so what you're saying is the new paradigm, this intelligent assembly line is we have changed the kind of the vector for intelligence away from the human to AI.
Yep.
The kind of the problem or the thing that we're throwing them at can be broken down into any number of smaller component pieces. So the intellectual work that a human would do can now be essentially deconstructed, and you can throw these kind of atomic-sized units of intelligence in AI at a bite-sized cost of 1 cent.
I think I would almost say it has to be.
Yeah.
I think everybody, we used to have that meme, right, of, people would start by looking at OpenAI, ChatGPT, whatever, and they would go, oh my God, this thing can talk to me. This could probably do my job. And then they sneakily type do my job.
Yeah.
And what you realize is that there's just not enough context or
Yeah.
knowledge or data or access to tools or various things at that level for an AI to reliably do your entire job, because your entire job is a very big, multifaceted thing.
Yeah.
And your job probably consists of hundreds to thousands of jobs that are all tiny. But at the micro level, at any one of those levels, they already can do those jobs. And the interesting thing about them is that you can buy them in such small units of intelligence that now you could automate that now. So you could wait, and maybe in like 5 years these things are complex enough and we've built just this grand experiment of a thing where these models can just turn up and do your job, and they have access to every tool that's available, and they can just do it as though a human was sat there. But I think what's more likely to play out quicker is if you actually just do the upfront work to enumerate the job better at smaller levels, and then automate each of those parts of the process.
So I think the key takeaway from your description of the intelligent assembly line for me would be that the human is now no longer the central piece of the process. We've shifted the human from being essentially fundamental to that process off to the edge.
Yeah. So I would, so these are the memes, right? We've got two good memes for AI implementation, which is the bionic human and the human at the edge. And I'd say there's almost a progression where we start in a world like we have now. The standard world is human at the center. I mean, we literally have like human-centered design is like the biggest like thing in the design space these days, and it's all about like it's human at the center, right? This is like literally where we are. And then I think the bionic human is the bit that we're more used to, which is that we say, all right, I get tools, and so I can imagine that I start with ChatGPT, and I'm like, you know what, this is actually kind of useful if I'm a bit stuck and I don't know what to write. I can get this to give me a prompt, and then now I write better because I get stuck less and I get writer's block less.
Yeah.
That's cool. I can see that. And then maybe like you do a bit of technical work and you start working with like Cursor or something like that, and you're like, shit, I can literally do this job quicker with this tool. And then you go, you know what, I might just dip my toe in and get a ChatGPT Pro subscription, and you start giving it like just esoteric topics to go and research for you, and you're like, shit, this thing's like having an intern. Like, all right, I can get a $200 intern.
Yeah,
great,
really cheap
fucking
intern.
nice.
Yeah.
And I can just, as long as I keep asking it questions, it keeps doing stuff.
Yeah.
And all those tools, like, they're amazing. They all 10x, 100x your productivity depending on your particular job. They open up entirely new skills that you couldn't have. They can augment you as a human. Like, you become the bionic man, right?
Yes.
You're the $6 billion man. We can rebuild him. He's faster, stronger, smarter, and you can become amazing. But the thing is, it's you that became amazing. So at that point in time, and to me, this is like step one, is like you should at least be a bionic human.
Yep.
Come on, like, do you want to be the bionic human or the not bionic human? Like, this feels like an obvious. Like, I mean, that's potentially a false dichotomy, but fuck it.
Yeah.
While we're here, like, what do you want to be? Like, bionic or not bionic? All right, is everybody else bionic? Yes.
Yeah.
I should probably be bionic, shouldn't I? Like, so that's almost like table stakes. Is you need to be using some of these tools because they will speed you up.
But this isn't binary. That's the problem, right? It's like everyone is on a spectrum here with AI.
They certainly are, aren't they? Sorry.
Don't read into that statement.
But yeah, but I would say the next bit is, the next major progression is like, well, the problem here is that now where's all the benefits of working 24/7?
Yeah.
Because I've noticed that when I go to bed, like my client environment isn't doing any work.
Yeah.
Even though auto approve is on, but there was no bugger there to tell it what to do. So it just sort of stops and sits around not doing stuff.
Yeah.
And to be honest, that's for the best, because when I just let it run for too long on auto improve, like, I just have to throw everything away, and I've burnt $10. So you know, like, that wasn't ideal. But what you really want to be able to do is to have everything just operate whenever it needs to operate. But to do that, you need to pull the human out, because that's not how humans operate. That's how software and code operates. And I think we talked a bit about this last week, but like, this would be the learning from, you know, like the Mag 7 sort of thing. These are all just software companies that just run software that runs, has like a marginal cost for the next person that comes into the business. Like it's classic software stuff. It runs 24/7. It's always making money, whether you're asleep or not. And then people come in and maintain the system effectively. And I think that's where you move to like the human at the edge model. Is that's going to be available now to a lot more businesses that weren't naturally software businesses, because they had so much like intelligent work or human work that needed to be done inside them. So again, like back to the service sector, I think a lot more of that is going to become software-like in nature, and then that's where there's like an even bigger operational cost improvement, because now the human is no longer the bottleneck.
Yes.
The human has moved to the edge. Even though the human was bionic, they should still be bionic when they turn up. But wouldn't it be great if you just didn't need them there at all, and the thing just ran on itself?
Yeah, there's an interesting point you made earlier about this this point of realization for a lot of people where they start to use AI and they're like, well, maybe I'll see if it can do my job. And then they pretty quickly realize that it can't. And this gives people a pretty false sense of security, you know. And perhaps this is part of the reason why there's a little bit of like disillusionment in part about AI and capabilities, and maybe there's like a framework here for us to explore to explain this stuff, and like let me have a crack at it, but feel free to like course correct me as I go. So most people engage with AI via an LLM, a large language model, right? And so that might be like OpenAI's ChatGPT, or it might be Anthropic's Claude, or it might be Google's Gemini, and these are all applications built on top of large language models. And if I were to try and describe how those work, it's very much like essentially human-led. I'm going to provide an input that's text-based, and it's going to provide me with an output. And so, for instance, let me think of an example here that everyone has. Like, I might ask it for how do I improve the kind of hygiene, cleanliness of my email inbox, right? It's really messy. I can't get to all of my emails every day. What are some of the ways I can get on top of this? And so it's just going to give me a bunch of essentially generic information based on its training data around ways in which, or strategies that I can improve the cleanliness of my email inbox and how to manage it on a daily basis. And that information is essentially probabilistic. And then I guess like the next layer across would be, well, okay, it doesn't know anything about my email inbox, right? It can't see my email inbox. So what I might do is create a workflow. And that workflow would be, okay, I want strategies for how to improve my inbox, but what I want you to have is now a tool that gives you access to my inbox. I'm still, as the human, running this workflow. The output is that it can now give me really tailored information about how to optimize my own inbox.
You can think of it like an MCP server that reads your emails.
Yeah, there's a tool there, but I'm still, as the human, in charge of this process end to end.
So I say, like, give me a strategy to help me clean up my inbox. And it says, okay, first thing I'll do is I'll look at your inbox and see what it looks like. And I'll give you a more specific strategy for your inbox. Makes sense?
Precisely.
Yeah, okay.
And then the next layer down is the agent, right? And I think the agent here is essentially, the distinction I would draw is that it's AI-led. So the previous two were human-led. I've gone and said, right, I want to improve my email inbox, or I want to optimize it, but there's a process that I've put in place to run this. Now I'm going to give the agent a goal and say, improve my email inbox. And it's going to determine what that process looks like. It's going to have a look at my, it might just determine that I need an agent to review emails on a set cadence throughout the day and determine which ones are high priority and which ones are not. Another agent might respond to the low priority ones. Another agent might put a bunch of spam emails that have snuck into my inbox into a different folder. Another agent might look at my calendar invites and coordinate any, overlaps in calendar appointments that I might have coming up. And then yet another agent might look at those overlaps and then reschedule some of those appointments. And now all of a sudden, like, I've not actively engaged in the process to get the output, which is the more optimized email inbox, and I've kind of just extended it to my calendar as well. Do you think that's like the framework here? Because I think most people's assessment of AI is through the very first bucket, which is just interoperating with the LLM. They're getting this very probabilistic output from something that they've input into the language model. And I think what we're suggesting is this intelligent assembly line is going to be a byproduct of these agentic processes.
Yeah, I maybe say it slightly differently. I would say maybe it's the intelligent assembly line creates the processes for that. The other bit that maybe if I was going to do one more step would be, it might not even need to be your inbox by this point, right? If there's a bunch of agents controlling this inbox, then why is it? Why do we need to assume it's you? So maybe it's just there's hundreds more inboxes now all of a sudden because they've all got their own inbox that they take care of, and they work in that way. But yeah, I think that would work.
I just wonder if that's the reason why you get people who think, yeah, this is not going to take my job. Because I mean, I think this is like a conversation that I find myself having with a lot of professionals now. You know, it's like, oh, I tried, a tool. It's often like I don't want to name names, but I will. Like Harvey, right? It's a classic one amongst lawyers. They've tried Harvey and gone, I've not used Harvey, so this is not necessarily my view. But other people are like, oh, it doesn't do what I thought it would do. It still requires a lot of my time to manage. To be honest, it just feels like another piece of software, right?
Yeah.
It's deterministic software that it requires the human to run through it to get the output. I think that's kind of the old paradigm. But yeah, I wonder if this is where some of that resistance is coming from. It's just, we only know the kind of the probabilistic LLM, and that can make mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, and the mistakes bit is the bit that I feel like I hear more often as to be the reason why these things are shit. Like, oh, this thing's stupid, and you're like, it's an interesting thing to say about a language model, because it's if you sort of know what it is, it's not clever or stupid. But it's like, okay, you've personified it in a way that it's stupid, and you'd say, so what do you mean by that? And the answer is, oh, it doesn't know this fact. And you'd go, yeah, that seems fair. Would you expect it to know this fact? And so if it was intelligent, it would know this fact. And you're like, oh wow, this word intelligence is doing so much heavy lifting.
Yeah, that's true.
In this framework. And you're like, right, okay, what we need to explore here is that this is just wrong tool for the job, sort of thing. So don't think about it as artificial. This is usually how I would talk for it. So don't think about it as artificial intelligence for a moment. Think about it as computers. And in this computer, we've got a new tool, and the new tool is language models. And what it does is I can talk to the fucking computer. Right? It's amazing, and the computer can understand me and talk back. Right? Now the computer's not lost any other tools that it had. And so can you ever think of a moment where, is there anything that computers can do that helps them remember stuff? And it's just well, yeah, I mean, they can, we have databases, and we have the internet, and we have hard drives, and we have files, and we can just write stuff down, and it has almost perfect recall. And you're like, yeah, exactly. So your problem with the intelligence of a thing is that the language model doesn't natively know the fact, but you also recognize that if it's part of a broader computer, the computer has a million tools to deal with fact recall and has a much better chance of recalling a fact than you. And they say, yeah. So the problem here isn't necessarily intelligence or even needing better models, it's just slightly better tooling. And I think this is partly why people have got really shit the bed over MCP recently. It's just so just for anybody that doesn't know, MCP is Model Context Protocol. Is a standardized way for large language models to talk to other tools on your computer. It's one way to think about it. And so those tools would be how to read something from a database, or how to use a web browser, or how to use a search engine. And what you find is that if you give like a language model those tools, it can start to make assessments like, all right, well, I don't know this, so I'll just look it up. And it's very much like human behavior, which is you go, you know what, I don't know that, I'll just look it up.
Yeah.
And we can give these things like incredible memories and things to solve some of those problems around like, well, what do you need to know? And I think like that's a very, like, we honestly don't know how humans do this, right? Humans know shit tons of stuff. A lot of it's nonsense. There's a lot of bullshit we don't need to know, and there's a lot of like extra stuff. But like when you come to doing your job, you don't need to know all that stuff. But it's kind of useful, and it's kind of there. And sometimes you get it right, sometimes you get it wrong. We're not perfect at fact recall either.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But if you took like that's at your whole job level. If you took it again, if you take the intelligent assembly line view and you say like, all right, well, let's break your job into 100 steps. For that one step, you probably only need to know about 5 or 6 facts. You can just write those 5 or 6 facts in the system prompt of that LLM, and now it knows all of those things. Or you can generate them on the fly and put them in the system prompt. Or you can like go and get them from a database and pull them out into the system prompt. Like it's solved at that level quite easily. I think it's hard to replicate like an entire human right now like that.
Yeah.
But you can certainly replicate the 1/100th of a human's capacity that you use inside a job at that point in time. The real thing is that we've never done the enumeration of the job in this way, because you never had to, because it was pointless, because you couldn't hire like 1/100th of a human to do something. Like the fact is that now you can hire 1/100th of a human for 1/1000th of the cost.
Yeah.
So
to
there's
do
now
that
like
thing in perpetuity.
so now there's like a reason to do that work, that upfront work, to lay out the job in that way.
Yeah, so it's the deconstructing of that intelligence into its component parts.
That's the entire name of the game.
Yeah. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because this is the big criticism of AI. It's like it's brittle without functioning memory. It hallucinates, it repeats itself, it loses track of what's important. This is not dissimilar to a human. If you strip away the human, get the memory component from the human, it's going to make shit up.
And again,
it's going to forget what it was thinking.
Model to this, right? So what underpins that is there's a criticism of AI that it can't do every single job in the world straight away.
Immediately, yeah.
Right? And it's like, all right, well, we have like a literal general intelligence in the world right now. And what we didn't do was take one version of it and clone it and make it do every job. What we had was we just let it go out there and shag and create many different versions of itself. That might be a bit British as terminology.
Yes.
But and then they each just niche down into specific roles that they used.
Yeah.
Like this is literally how we created super intelligence on the planet. Is that we niche down into like lots of very different things, and we did like one thing well. And I think we're just going to see that on like an even more accelerated level, is that even inside the job that the human does, like that's not going to be niche enough. If we want even more efficiency, we have even more specialization of labor.
Yeah.
And that's what you will do using AIs.
I think it's also the type of memory as well, right? I mean, there's this like semantic memory that I think it's already really good at. It's like the fact recall, or like mapping entities and relationships between different pieces of data. Like it's already really good at this. But then if you overlay like episodic memory as well, so there are then like event sequences, like different experiences or interactions that it can then apply to that semantic memory or contextual memory, so it's learning from like past experience. Like that's when I think it gets really interesting, because you have this now like this layered understanding, and it can continue to search through that like contextual experience over time to work out what's the best way to do a thing in the future. It's like kind of a self-learning organism at that point. I think this is where like the knowledge graph is really fascinating for me. Like this is obviously something that you've done a lot of work on with stack work over the last like 6-7 months, but okay, I think this is like a big unlock.
I've probably been like leaning more on stack work.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah,
it's true.
Definitely. Like,
but it's an
unlock.
interesting unlock, isn't it, in this space? Because I feel like this is the big blocker for a lot of people with AI, and it just feels like we're almost there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, some of the best things that you can do, like there's certain tricks that you can use with AI that make the output like 100 times better. Like one of the first one is you ask it to reflect, which is basically like going, "You sure?" And he goes, "Oh yeah, sorry, I just lied about all that. Like it's actually this." And you're like, "Okay, cool."
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised like how well just a self-reflection on an answer improves the prompt.
Yeah.
But like I almost think by far the biggest bang for the buck you get is the ability to provide examples back into the system.
Yeah.
So like when you're prompting the thing, like if you ask a question and you give like the top 10 versions of this question and answer that you've ever got from this machine. I said, this is what I put as an input. This is the output that I got. Now give me the answer for this particular situation. You get amazing responses out of these things.
Yeah.
Because they can then start to unpick all those patterns, and they unpick the patterns that are relevant to the situation. But to get to that prompt, like you would never type that.
Yeah, true.
You just wouldn't. But what you might do is type the initial question and then have a different system which uses like a graph database to look up all the relevant examples that are appropriate to the situation that you're building, and then have like an LLM summarize that into the system prompt and then ask the question. So all of that can happen without any additional input from you.
Yeah.
But the difference is staggering. So obviously I was doing this in the space of like product management and ticket creation and various things like this, and so it would be a case of like, okay, well, we've got like a few years worth of work here on this GitHub repo, and like all of these just different GitHub tickets that are getting created like day in, day out. Like I want to achieve this. I'm building like say this particular endpoint. Just going to get me like the best. Give me 50 examples that are relevant to this, that all like became actual finalized tickets at the end of this. So all of them ended up in work. All of that work got done and then merged into the product. So these were all good specs. So give me 50 of those. Now go and look at the specific thing that I want to and write me like a system prompt with 5 examples that pulls from the 50 that you just pulled out of your memory.
Yeah.
And like you could almost one-shot these things at this point from a simple stub. So I need you to do this, this, and this, and like all of the rest of the context will just come out of that. But it really is driven by those examples. That's the thing.
Yeah.
And then even in that process, like we didn't do that as a single step. That was just the example generation step. Like looking at how you might do the ticket, and then you would look at like there's a different step for writing unit tests and a different step for writing code examples that meet the unit tests and so on. You can break the thing down into like many small components that then all just run after you stub out something in 5 sentences.
Yeah.
And that's a huge time saver for something like that.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but a lot of it comes down to like, well, again, how do you provide the context into the model? So there's a lot of tooling that's in there.
Yeah.
But even before the tooling, it's the question. I almost feel like maybe we're like moving backwards through the thing here. But like before you get the tooling, you need to understand, well, what's the process that I'm doing here? Like, what am I doing when I write a ticket? And you would go like, at the human level, it's well, I write the ticket. Maybe before that, I had the design, and I did the requirements, and then I did the spec, and then I had the design, and then I did the ticket. And you say, okay, but like when you write the ticket, is that one step? And it's like, well, probably isn't. It's probably right. Well, I'm going to take the design and I'm going to break it down into like these different bits, and then for each one of those bits, I want to look for relevant examples for each of those bits, and then I'm going to figure out how I plan that bit to do, and then I also need to think about what the unit tests are, the acceptance criteria. So now that's the next task that I'm moving on. There's several different tasks inside here that we just do in one shot as a human because we don't think about it, because that's our job. But if you really wanted to make a machine do it better, you would do it in 5 or 6 distinct steps. And I think the unlock when you work in this space is you go, oh shit, like I've been doing this the whole time.
Yeah.
I've always been breaking down my work. Like anybody that's really good at their job can usually explain how they broke down that work into smaller components that were easily understood. Like anybody that's good at teaching, anybody that's really good at like onboarding the next person, anybody that seems to do everything like just a little bit more productive than the next guy, like, and then you say, well, how have you done that? And it's like, all right, well, I do this, and then I do this, and then I do this, and like, you go, you're so organized. But really what they've done is just recognize that they were actually doing 5 things. And they've then just often documented it, enumerate the thing, and then improved it. But you literally can't improve a thing until you write it down, because you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I spent like decades like in the UK, from Rolls-Royce through to like law firms, like working on process improvement work, where it was just, all right, like give me the process that you go through, and we go through this like 4-step process, and you go, okay, I just want to go and observe the process for a bit, and you do some shadowing, or you do the process for a while, and you go, oh, all right, okay. And what you'll do is you go, so these 4 steps that you had, like we had to take a step down, there's actually 20 steps, and they go, oh, okay, cool, 20 steps, and it looks very nice and laid out, and this is what you've got them to talk you through on the board. And you say, yeah, so then I spent like a week or so just running the process, and like here's what it actually looks like, and now there's like 400 steps on the board, and there's like 40 loops, and there'll be a couple of loops where you go and you sit in this one for about a week.
Yep.
and they're just like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And I don't know, we used to do this, like to the law firm I mentioned, we used to do this as like at the business case level of somebody trying to stand up a new system, and we'd say, let's just figure out the process first. And I killed so many just nonsense projects that just never needed to get off the ground by just pointing out how ridiculous your current process was. And I'd say, what you could do is just do this, and then they're like, huh, and you save like an entire person's job, because just like all the work disappears, because usually it was just something slightly nonsensical that they were doing, and then it became like it just had inertia in the business.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it just never changed.
Yeah, I wonder if this is like a byproduct of that 9-to-5 like rigid structure, where inevitably you add these units of intelligence into the business, and you discover, oh, we actually passed a tipping point where we don't need this many units of intelligence to accomplish the thing. And so now each unit of intelligence is taking it upon itself to try and fill out the rest of its time with busy work.
We're both like just laughing because it feels like we're talking about people as units of intelligence, which just sounds like so dystopian.
Such wankers.
Yes. A pair of wankers in it.
So we're just adding people into these businesses, and they're filling their time with busy work.
Yeah,
there's maybe like a there's maybe like a zero-based budgeting aspect to this as well, right? In bigger companies where, divisionally you're given a budget, and in order to secure that budget the following year, you need to spend it, and so you probably try to justify spending it in any which way you can. No,
I think
I'm
it's
speaking
slightly
generally,
different, right? I don't know if there's I don't think it's because of too many people or anything like that, because I think organizations are generally constrained.
Yeah.
You can't do the work. I think there's a certain amount of inertia that comes from like, we did it that one way once and we never really thought about it. But I do want, it's an interesting thing, I hadn't really thought about this before, but maybe there's something about like the lack of enumeration, because I feel like I'm saying enumeration so many times. Like, what the fuck's going on? Like what I do think is that whenever I would go through that process, you would then like turn up to the finance director or whoever and say, okay, well, this is like what you think the process is doing. This is what it's actually doing. This is why it's so painful. Like these 2 loops here, these are the problems. This is why you never get what you want. And it's like, fuck, why are we doing that?
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, do you want to do this instead? And he's like, fuck yeah, I want to do that. And it's gone straight away. And I think it's just that like it happens under the hood, because it never needs to get written down, because it's just I just do that and then he does that, and you never see the process like at a low enough level of detail that you could do it. And that was like, it almost like felt like a superpower at times, like when you had that opportunity to do stuff like that. This is almost always how it played out, was like, it turns out there's loads of stuff that we do that we didn't think we used to do. Turns out we can save tons of money by just not doing all the shit we don't need to do. We don't know why it's got no judgment. Like, these things just happen because people are kind of messing. We haven't been on it. So let's just do the stuff we only have to do. And everyone's like,
this is also a result of the lack of enterprise memory that is dynamic, right? That persists because people come and go from organizations. They take with them their context. They take with them their experience. They take with them their knowledge of how to do a thing. And then you bring in someone else, they might have a slightly different way of doing that thing and have different experience and different context. And so I almost feel like this is another factor in why we never actually map the way we do the things. It's like companies that just keep bolting on new bits of software, right? It's like after a while, you need to just have a way to interface with a bunch of different bits of software that do part of your job for you, and before you know it, you've ended up with this massive bloated stack, and no one's sat down and determined, well, do we need all of this stuff? Can we get back to first principles and figure out like what's necessary and what's a luxury? But yeah, it comes back to that memory question, right? It's like there's an opportunity there just for organizations to be able to ingest all of that data,
I mean,
and store it over the long term.
interestingly, I think a lot of this stuff is because of the PC. So I remember like hashing this out a little bit with like when I was at Rolls-Royce back in the day, and I was young at Rolls-Royce, was my first job out of university, and I remember talking to a very senior guy that was on our program that had taken like a step down to be our program manager, sort of thing, which is still pretty solid role for a guy, but being like former VP level. I was talking about like why is everything like so just like they were pretty process heavy at Rolls-Royce, but it wasn't quite enough. There's so much stuff that wasn't well defined, and I sort of put forward the idea that like we kind of killed off the quality assurance manual like using the PC.
Right.
And the idea is like you used to have like things were hard enough, and particularly like, you go back to like the IT space when you would use punch cards and various different things and like mainframe computers, and you had to like fight for resources and stuff, and you had to get things correct before you started. So you had a lot of processes around how to do things in a way that led to good outcomes. And so what that meant was a lot of stuff was written down and documented and enumerated, to use my favorite word today. Everybody drink if I say enumerate. And so I said, well, then we had this like productivity marvel, which was we put a computer on everybody's desk, and all of a sudden like we forgot about how to write memos and how to like properly communicate stuff. I had to write stuff down, and then we invent Agile and Scrum, and we go like let's just not write anything down, let's just be in the moment. And it's like you talk about vibe coding, well, that's not fucking Agile. It's just like let's not write anything down, we're all just going to be in the moment together, right guys? Hold hands, we'll stand up together once in the morning and just check if we're vaguely doing the stuff we said we were going to do, and we'll all say, yeah, that's all from me, yeah, nothing to report, move on. Like it just be, but like we destroyed a lot of that culture of actually, operating on the business, of saying like, well, how does the business? And it became something that just lived in the computer programs and the people that use the tools, and you just stopped writing stuff down, and it became quite rare. And then you have like that sort of like Lean Six Sigma style process improvement revolution that tore through certain industries, and then it's always been like it's never been quite as impactful in the service industry, because you didn't get the same high transactional throughput in a lot of these areas. So it never really took hold in the same way. But I think it is the right sort of framework for how you would go about improving these processes. And it really does come down to just, you know what, there's finally enough of a payoff to make it worthwhile to write all this stuff down again. We've hit a plateau where we can do so much more than we used to be able to, because we had this productivity boom of everybody's got computers, now everybody's got phones, now the internet's everywhere. Fuck, like it's just, it's amazing like how connected we are. I mean, we're sat in a fucking metal box at the beach, and we've got like 500 megs a second internet. Like, what the fuck?
Crazy.
Like, it doesn't make sense. And I think there's now enough, as I said, like I think the human now is like that last bottleneck of just, well, not last bottleneck, that's just not how bottlenecks work. There's always a new bottleneck. But it's the current biggest bottleneck.
It's the next one.
If you can reduce like your cost for intelligence from, we say like 100 grand is like a human for a year, but maybe it's 10 grand is like the minimum amount you can viably contract out here. If you can reduce that to cents, there's just such a huge difference that there's now a reason to go through the slightly painful work of documenting everything at a low enough level that you can then take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean this is the bottleneck there is challenging because it's almost like codependent on inertia and like almost like identity that's baked into expertise. It's going to be very hard to ask that same person to then go, do you know what, I am like the central conduit in this process, in this workflow. I need to push myself off to the side. There's a whole bunch of variables there that even if you can see the advantage, you're probably going to have a little bit of reluctance, and that's fine. I kind of understand it. When you've built up a career doing a thing that has essentially given you domain expertise and by extension some form of perhaps identity or status that's linked into that domain expertise, it's going to be very hard to go, do you know what, the computer can just do this better.
And I think that's also what drives the bionic human approach to, like, so much of what's being created at the moment is bionic human tools.
Yeah.
Like the big success story. I mean, it's not a surprise that like most of the people working in AI are software developers and data scientists, because of course they are. They're the ones that have been obsessed with this for a long time. They're the ones that kind of get it at a technical level, and it's easier for them to take advantage of it, so they go first. And what they created is a lot of tools to help them be better at their jobs. And I don't think we should be massively surprised by that. It doesn't necessarily feel like it's where it's going to end up. Obviously, like the work we're doing on Hive with StatWork was all about, well, what if it wasn't the developer that was the bottleneck? What if we actually move this up to the repo level, to the company level, and it's more that you have like a technical product manager, like a very technical product manager is where we ended up, because there is still a lot of stuff to cover. But there is a way to do this where you don't need the developers even, and the developer tooling is just a distraction. And then once you have that, like, well, why even bother with the IDE? Like the developer environment, like of Cursor, everything else, like it feels like it's all bionic human stuff, and it feels like it's probably a stepping stone to somewhere else. But you can certainly see why it's valuable for any developer right now, and it's easier to get to that bionic stage. Now, I don't think the person that creates the human at the edge version of that program is actually a developer, because the developer can't see it. Like, I don't know, somewhere in this map, I think in that drawer down there, I've got Rick Rubin's The Creative Mind book, which is excellent. And he talks a lot in there about like beginner's mind and this ability to turn up to a process fresh. And all of a sudden you start to see the problems that are there. And we've all had this at various times in our career, where you'll come into a new job and you'll say to the person, like, why'd you do that? That's a bit that's a bit dumb, for lack of a better word. And they go, it's just because it's like how it's done. And in that moment, while you're a beginner, you could potentially fix that. Usually you don't, and then you hand over that same job 6 months later, and the next person comes in and says, why'd you do that? And you go, a funny story. Like, I thought exactly the same. But I think what you'll see is a lot more people coming in with a kind of beginner's mind to these industries and to these services, and saying like, all right, just explain to me why you do that, because it doesn't quite make sense. And then when you explain those step down, like in these different processes, like what you're doing is enumerating all of those sub-processes that you go through and all of those tasks. And then that person can go, okay, well, if I just capture that into this sort of structured agent, structured workflow, however we want to deliver it, then all of a sudden I can just run this as 20 different like little intelligent bodies that can do the work. And I think that's the payoff. In there.
Well, I'd say the other side of this as well is that you have some implied resistance from people who see it that way, who are like, this is just the way we've always done it. And then there are a group of people who will say, this is the way we have to do it. And sometimes there's truth to that, because their industry is so mature that the process that they have to follow is hard-coded in regulations, or there are compliance frameworks around how they have to run through this stuff. We see that in healthcare, we see it in financial services, we see it in insurance. There's a bunch of different places, right? But that doesn't mean that there's not an application here.
Well, I mean, even in like regulation, the taxi industry was a heavily regulated industry, right? Until there was enough money to be made disrupting it that it just, I feel like it almost doesn't exist anymore. Like, it's less so with hotels, because I feel like I'm more likely to go back to a hotel these days than an Airbnb. Like, it's gone. It's flipped the other way. But
Well, I think the framing here, which we kind of touched on last week in the value trap, but if you are able to essentially redesign your business process and you shift the human to the edge, that enables you to collapse costs pretty dramatically in the business, because that cost center that existed around the human, around 100 grand, you're now able to get like similar outputs or comparable outputs for, a fraction of that cost that is being produced in perpetuity on the same cadence. Basically, there's no disruption to that output. And then obviously what that big collapse in your OPEX, your operational expenses, will lead to is pricing power, especially in these more like traditional service business sectors. That enables you to go and explode the size of your margins in the business, and then what that will do is just absolutely skyrocket your enterprise valuation, because your enterprise valuation is often looked at through the lens of your peer competitors as well. And so if you've got this standout business that now has these unit economics where none of your peer competitors have anywhere near the kind of the comparable unit economics, and your business is worth a shit ton more than all of theirs. And this is now also like a corollary to the assembly line, Ford's assembly line, right? Because that first mover advantage for Ford is obviously huge, right? We talked about that number of automobiles produced in the second year, amounting to all of the other automobiles being produced by his competitors combined. I mean, that's the scale of first mover advantage here. And so I guess the link between all of this is like, it almost doesn't matter what your motivation is here, whether it's like you've just been doing this because that's the way it's always been done, or there's like, a kind of regulatory or hard-coded resistance to doing anything different. It almost won't matter, because someone will come along and do it AI native. And then the unit economics are so vastly different at that point that you have no choice. You have to follow suit. You have to do the same thing, or you'll suffer at the death of 1,000 cuts.
I think so. And I think there's maybe like another couple of steps that we can start to step up to justify that, and like, or what do you do? Like, so like, I think like we've probably talked through now, from an intelligent assembly line, what we're talking about is that your 10-step process is probably 100 steps, and by enumerating those steps, and then and then orchestrating them inside software so that they can run without humans, except for the moments where you just need a tiny bit of input. Then all of a sudden, that feels like it's just going to reduce costs massively, which makes sense. So the next, like, to take the one step above that you would do beforehand, is to say, all right, well, but which one? Like, which 10-step process? Should have been 10 steps. Sounds like AA, doesn't it? It's like 10, not 12. 12? That sounds about right. So which process are we doing here? And so, like, what do we do there? Well, that's what comes down to, like, right, well, you need to understand a few different things. And the first is, like, well, who are you as a business, and, like, what's your strategy, and where are you trying to go, and what are you trying to achieve? And that's like one input to this. And that'll tell you, like, like where you're heading, what's important to you, what you need to prioritize just generally. The next thing you probably want to think about is, like, well, at this high level, like, what are all the different business processes, like, inside your organization? And, like, how can we start to map those out? And, like, what do they contribute in terms of, like, revenue, and what do they consume in terms of cost? And this gives us, like, a quick view of an organization to say, like, all right, well, your high cost, low revenue services are annoying. Maybe you just need to get rid of those, frankly, if, like, high cost, low revenue. A high cost, high revenue service that can be turned into a high revenue, low cost service is a massive, like, strategic advantage for you if that maps to your strategy. So we can take these, like, grid of services that we've got, and we can overlay your strategy and look what's important. And the next thing that we would do, the final one, part 3, is probably to look at, like, okay, well, what's the actual impact of AI? So let's take, like, a tabletop view of each of these services that are in our strike zone, and so look at, like, well, which are the ones that are likely to start getting impacted by AI, and how are they going to get impacted by AI? Can we see a clear view? Because some of them might just be quite defensible. If you've got a particular service line which is patting people on the head, and that just happens to drive tons of revenue for you, like, AI is not going to get rid of that. Like, that's going to be a manual job to pat people on the head. You're safe. That's fine. Leave that one. But the ones where there's opportunity to systematize it are the ones that you need to move quick on, because that's where you're going to get the bigger payoff. Like, are other people going to do that? Well, probably, but at the moment you'd be early if you're doing it now.
Yep.
So that would be the kind of next step up of like, well, how do I start to think about doing this in my own business? Is, well, do you understand what all the business processes are at that high level? Do you understand the revenue and cost base? Do you understand which ones are going to get impacted by AI? Do you understand which ones are going to map to your strategy? And then that's how we're going to start prioritize these. And the one you should start in is the one that's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck.
Yep.
Like, I wouldn't necessarily start by doing like the tiniest thing that isn't going to move the needle, because this is, to my mind, is more of a race against time. Maybe this is just my bias for action and impact here, is that like I just don't think like doing something that's going to save you like half an FTE is probably not going to change anything about your business, and it's not going to then lead to you wanting to do the next thing or fully committing to this service. And then I think there is like a question around, well, how do you do that? Do you replace the engine on the plane while you're flying, or do you want to like create a new plane on the floor and then take that one off, which is we've covered already with the Netflix approach versus doing it in life.
The only thing I would add to that is if you are the person that is patting other people on the head, you'd still want to be Bionic, because there's a bunch of things that you're doing.
That could go wrong.
Around, yes, but there's still a bunch of tasks that that you're having to do around the actual patting of people on the head. I'm not sure where this like example came from.
I just wanted something that wasn't
something
like
let's just say it's like
physical,
physiotherapy
didn't
or
need
something.
to be
right?
robotic.
Let's just say it's a physio.
Yeah.
But like there's appointment scheduling, there's like, there's a whole bunch of administrative tasks. So if you're a physio sitting there going, great, no worries, I don't need to worry about AI, cool.
Yeah, that part of your service.
Yeah,
is
it's
fine.
the core
You may as
part.
well reduce the costs on the rest.
Yes, exactly. You want to get it down to it. It's like the fewest moving parts as possible.
Yeah.
So that still makes a lot of sense. I think that's the key, right? You've got a bunch of competitive advantages by being the first to move here as well. You don't really want to waste your time by dipping the toe in here. Go and find the biggest impact and then dive into that first. It dramatically lowers your OPEX, which gives you a bunch of pricing power to go and play with in the market. You can now scale that business beyond, any kind of human constraint that may have previously limited your ability to scale. I think the other aspect to this as well is like, especially in knowledge work, I think you start to see like a kind of quality standardization that emerges as well, right? So it's like, right now we see a lot of human variability in output across different industries. Like, I don't know, not all lawyers are created equally, not all accountants are created equally. There's like a skill disparity that exists. There's a spectrum.
Well, even like the day that you've had shit news,
Yeah,
you're just
exactly.
not producing the same output.
Yeah,
you did
exactly.
on your best day.
Doesn't need to be necessarily tied to ability. It could just be there's
Moment,
any number
mood,
of
all sorts.
exactly. But I think you just eliminate that, and you just end up having more standardization across.
Yeah, you would definitely reduce the variability, right?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be more so. That makes a lot of sense.
And then there's obviously like the investment and capex questions that emerge from this as well, and I think that also ties back into Ford's assembly line, because obviously you started to see these huge shifts in capital away from needing to go down this artisanal process of building a car toward, okay, well, we need to invest in plant and equipment now. This is quite unique. We need to invest in factories that can support that plant and equipment.
True.
And
even for Ford, right? The time and the investment to actually go and do the work to understand, like, well, what are all the component parts here of this process, and like how could I make that better? That's not a simple job. Like it's not. If everybody was just good at this, we'd probably just do it all the time because it does pay off. But
exactly,
I do think that's kind of rare, and like there is an investment to be made there up front about, well, how do I actually understand all this stuff? You might say, how would I enumerate all of this? But then you'd have to drink.
We'd both be drunk if we were actually drinking.
It's
right
way
now.
too early. Like.
But yeah, I think because that's the other question here that I think about a lot as well is like, what do capital allocators do with all of this stuff? It's VC exists to make a big spread trade in companies that have either not yet established product market fit but might, or have found product market fit, and it's still really early. And the idea there is to make such a big spread trade that you can basically get, find one winner in 10, which is probably a gross oversimplification, that one winner returns the fund. And I think what's really interesting here is if you're a capital allocator, you could just bypass that like product market fit paradigm altogether. There's like, we've talked about this before, right? There's this valley of death that exists there. And it's okay so long as you find the winner. And, as it is now anyway, in venture capital, there's a huge power law in return structures. Like the vast majority of returns tend to go back to the, half dozen big VC funds in Silicon Valley. But if you could just go and have a look at like a regular service business,
I mean,
you have this like 100 to 1,000x return profile on a traditional business by going and cutting all of the costs out of it.
And then particularly if you grow it as well.
And then you get scale, yeah.
So I think because I think we talked about that a lot last week with the buy versus build, right? But there is like a piece that we haven't covered, which is like, well, what does that mean to you if you're like in like a small business or particularly like a service sector that you've never really had to compete with anybody like that? Is that it's likely that comes to your sector.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's like the legal industry hasn't been competing with like say a bunch of innovation from Silicon Valley, but I've been in a few startups, like you spend a fuck ton of money on lawyers, so yeah. I think that everybody over there knows how much lawyers cost and how much they'd love them to cost less. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's an area that gets massively hit by this sort of level of innovation. Like I think similarly with accountants, like there's definitely a lot of like, I don't know, just regulation around these things that makes them harder areas to go into. But the interesting thing about compliance and regulation is that that's a set of rules that are documented and codified, and things that are documented and codified are easier to systematize. So again, if you unlock this ability to systematize things quicker, then that's something that those systems can do better than humans. It takes a long time for a human to learn a rule and to then consistently apply it. Like that's law school, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas like if it's just like one law that they need to do, then you can just teach the computer that one law, and that's the agent that does that law, for instance. So I mean, that's like not how this would work.
I think the thing that compounds this a little bit is also if you reduce the variability of the human output, then the pricing dynamic changes altogether, because that's what a lot of professional services is built on, right? It's like I have some informational asymmetry that as lawyer A, I've got an informational advantage over lawyer B, and therefore I can charge more. Or maybe I've got more experience than lawyer B, so I can charge more. And that experience gives me that informational asymmetry to go and exploit in a marketplace. And so if you have less variability of output there, where you are able to, I don't know, standardize legal advice, and maybe we're talking more like initially at like a paralegal level. It's like contract review. Instead of me going to a lawyer, can I just review this contract with a language model and identify if there are a bunch of red flags here that I should think about? If I can do that, and I've just standardized the kind of the level of output, whether I talk to Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT, it kind of doesn't matter. Then I think you lose that pricing differential that exists in professional services. And then the question is, do I need so many lawyers and accountants? And
I mean, I think less is where it goes. And like, how good does your language model need to be to say, well, it depends, and I can't say for sure. But it gives you like a really vague reason why I'm going to bill you $100,000, but I'm not actually going to give you an answer, because then I would be responsible for the answer, and it's like, okay, great. Like, so I need to work it out anyway. But basically,
the key is that, like Ford breaking down like a really complex artisanal car building process into simple repeatable steps in a factory, we are also suggesting that we need to break down this like complex knowledge work into even more bite-sized component parts that we then throw like a kind of atomic AI sized unit of intelligence at to go and solve.
Yeah. So
And yeah.
Sorry, you finish.
No, go.
I was just gonna say, like, I think we've kind of like walked back up a tree in a way to go like, all right, well, what was the intelligent assembly line, and like a lot of it's around that process improvement, like the enumeration, the creation of the task, the orchestration. We walked that back up to the service layer to say, like there's key services that you're going to want to start on that are going to be good to hit first, and like there's a process for how you would establish those. And then I think the next layer above that, which I think we have touched on a little bit in the last few, but maybe we just tie it back in here, is that there are services and like industries that are going to get hit more, which is kind of like what we're saying here, right? Is that you can imagine something like legal and accounting like seem like the sort of things that might be good for, like, ripe for disruption here. But there are like heuristics for like what makes a good area to move into. Now, I don't, like, if I project forward like 10 years, I don't really think there's going to be any industries that aren't affected by this, because I can't really think of many jobs or services or businesses that I would engage with that require no intelligence. Like there's a lot of intelligence in all of these things. Like even if you're empty, I'm looking at a bin out the window there. But if you're emptying the bins, there's a fleet plan that goes into emptying the bins. The fleet plan will be devised around like, okay, well, how are we going to schedule all these trucks? Like, how often do we need to do stuff? What's the price of fuel? Like, how easily accessible are things? Like, what's the size of the vehicle we can get in various places? Like, there's actually like way more variables that go into doing anything efficiently than you think, and there's always intelligence involved. And so I think it is broadly distributed across the board, but it will diffuse through some industries quicker. I think in a way a lot of the like, I don't know. I was gonna say like I don't know. I was gonna say like, is it that some of the more like high tech automated stuff goes slower just because so much of those industries is already automated? But that's like kind of back to the Duolingo discussion from last time. And it's like maybe like they're set to do well, but what I don't get is like, well, why would you still have like 100,000 people?
Yeah.
So I think either way, like there's cuts coming to all of those places.
It's like an interesting like mindset application here as well, where you mentioned, there are like which I can't remember your exact framing, but it was like cuts in certain areas, right? We're talking about like the impact as being overtly negative, but it only depends on whether or not you have this like fixed mindset around your career and identity that's based on your domain expertise. This is like a massive opportunity to go and rewrite all of the rules, right? Just go and like find the optimal way to do the thing that you've always done without constraints. Yeah. So I think
to tie it back to that opening tangent, right? That's why the skill to learn is like permissionlessness, agency, just doing stuff that you didn't know how to do.
Yeah.
Like it's that.
Because it like seriously reshapes working identity as well. Like when we talk about shifting the human from the center of the process to the edge of the process, it's like, okay, so now I don't like execute any of the work. I just maybe at best I validate some of the work, right? So there's that shift. Then there's like the this kind of meaning and purpose built around expertise that shifts. We talked about that already. But there's also like operating hierarchies within organizations. Like if you go and flatten information and standardize, like, or at the very least reduce the variability across information within an organization, how do you justify these kind of working hierarchies that exist as well? Do you need to have so many layers to, these kind of people frameworks in the business? Probably not, is what we're saying. But there's a bunch of restructuring that occurs there.
Oh, definitely. Like it's gonna shift a lot of stuff. Yeah. And I feel like there's going to be some things that you do that will be like immensely valuable. So maybe this does track back to the Ford comment around people generally getting paid more that work in that environment. Was like, if there's a thing that you can do and you get paid like 10 times more, but you only do a tenth of the work. I mean, to me, that sounds like an absolute winner. But I think what you'll see is like the human, like if a lot of the work that you have to do goes away, there's always new work. I think it's hard to figure out what it is at the moment, and there's definitely like a transition period between big organizations to small organizations that I think is super painful
completely
across the board, but without harping on that too much. Like, I think that there's like the human moves to like the next best use of their time. Like, what's the next best, highest value use of their time? It used to be filling in spreadsheets and adulting and doing your taxes or whatever, and then if that disappears, like, I find it hard to think that that's a bad thing. Like,
I agree.
Like, yes, great. Like, maybe it's just like going for a walk in the sun for a couple of hours and like spouting ideas into your AI assistant, which is my new favorite thing to start the day. At the
glorious.
moment.
Yeah. Well, to go completely full circle here as well, it's like, then why do we have the time structure that we work within, this 9 to 5 paradigm? If we can just, don't need to work those standardized hours because we've got agents running 24/7, we can actually be more deliberate in where we go and divert that time. We can divert time to thinking and exploring ideas, both with AI but also other humans. Like, I think that's...
And often, like, the muse comes when you're distracted, right? Like, it's not usually that you have like your best, most creative moments, be that in art or music or anything, like when you're like forcing it.
Yeah.
It's usually in the moments of distraction when you give yourself the time to actually see what's going on and hear, like, what the world wants to tell you at that point. And like, that's something that is robbed from most people in their day-to-day careers, unfortunately. So you don't have that time to explore and to think about stuff and to like think about what you just did, like think about how the business is operating. And I think there is still like what like a lot of LLMs are going to be very good at is optimizing stuff that we know needs to be optimizing. There's pretty a question around how easy it is to systematize like the creative part and the figuring out what to do next. I think it certainly lacks sort of intent in a way, but then there are ways to describe goals in language that then says, okay, well, here's a set of metrics optimized for this metric for now. But then at some point somebody else is going to come along and say, all right, well, we don't need to optimize for that anymore because we're distorting the whole system at this point.
Interesting.
But like how much of that can be systemized? It feels like that'd be harder. It doesn't feel like it's impossible.
What do you mean, determining what the goal should be?
Yeah.
There's like, goal inference to a degree as well, based on like how a bunch of things are done. Can I infer what the goal should be based on, a bunch of different data?
I mean, maybe we're all just like tiny little entrepreneurs and there's billions of entrepreneurs just doing stuff, or maybe there's 1 billion entrepreneurs do stuff and then everybody else is just having a lovely time because everything's dirt cheap all of a sudden and you don't need stuff and there's massive abundance. Or not, maybe everyone's a serf and that sounds horrible.
No,
I don't like that world.
too.
So we'll try and avoid that.
So there's something I forgot earlier when we were talking about Ford's assembly line. So it came from looking into, I think it was inspired by slaughterhouses, but he was like essentially looking at the disassembly of animal carcasses in Chicago's meat packing plant.
That's not what I expected you to say.
Yeah, that stuck out to me. Like, again, all of this, like, I've just gotten from like a Smithsonian piece that I was flicking through last night, and I just thought, like, because I must admit I didn't know that. Like, this was kind of foreign to me, and I was like, oh. So it's interesting that even like that's come from somewhere, right? He's gone and looked at this kind of lateral environment and gone, no, I wonder if I can apply that to cars.
Well, I do think that's the dirty secret of creativity, is that everything is derivative, and it's almost like just mutations on a base of what we know.
Yeah.
So I do sort of feel like you could just include random mutations into stuff inside AI and then start to see more creativity come out. I don't necessarily know that it needs to be humans. I don't know. Like there's I feel like there's like with all this is like massively tangential, but I feel like we're probably about an hour in here, so we can do that.
Yeah.
Which is there's a lot of stuff going on in the US Senate these days around like disclosure of aliens.
Yes.
As I said, tangent. You've been warned. And like And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, the government are like literally talking about how they're covering up aliens, and we're all just ignoring it, which is odd.
Yeah.
That's what we're doing. I thought if you'd have told like 12-year-old Pete this, I'd be like, that's the biggest news in the world.
Yeah.
You know, like my X Factor magazine is true. Like, fuck. Like,
Yep.
did we even land on the moon? All this sort of stuff. And then you're like, all right, well, that's interesting. That. And so all of a sudden I've started to listen to a few more, like, there's a good podcast called American Alchemy. The guy Jesse like, worked with Peter Thiel, I think, in investment space. And he started doing a lot of stuff around what's going on here, and like talking to various people, talking, like what's credible, what's not credible, like what can we hang our hat on. And, like, one of the things that comes out a lot is this idea that there's maybe something around like consciousness and humans, and maybe there's like more going on than we know here, and maybe like these like what we think of as aliens and maybe just like different forms of consciousness from somewhere else. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And one thing that comes up with a few of the, like a common thread amongst a bunch of these people is, like, is there something that's just like our intuition is more than just an intuition? Like those moments of like just like absolute deja vu that feel like you are actually just looking at it. It's like, no, I've been here before. I know this exact moment.
Interesting, yeah.
Or like I can see something that's going on. Like when I relax enough, I can then just intuit what's going on. And like, so I was listening to a guy, I think this was actually when Hal Puthoff was on Rogan the other week, and I was listening to that, and he was talking about the remote viewing. And again, it kind of sounds like, oh, what you're kind of talking about is just like applied intuition in a way. Yeah, this is like really weird. And like maybe there is something that humans are a bit weird like this, where there's something that exists on like a quantum level that we could get really good machines, they could speak to us really nicely, they could do a lot of what we need to do with intelligence, but then now they lack intuition, and we just become the intuition engine for the thing. And that's the bit that's left, and then we all now have way more time to just like relax into this state, and then that's fantastic.
Do you know, I had this thought the other day. I was like, I guess like one of the fears behind essentially growing dependence on AI is that we forget how we've done things, how we've gotten here. And it occurred to me that the fear would be that in generations from now, let's say hypothetically emerging out of a great cataclysm, would look upon structures that we've built that remain, if they remain, and they might be predisposed to viewing them as great wonders because they can't comprehend how we built them. And I just wonder if there's like a downstream risk of all this stuff. Like I think about this now, right, where I'm talking to you about how I'm using AI as this like great enabler, like I'm able to learn so many different things, but I don't think everyone will. And I kind of wonder if by essentially putting society on these kind of an agentic framework, do we just forget a lot of stuff that was essential to us getting here in the first place?
Does it matter? I don't know.
Yeah, and no, that is the valid question.
I think, like, to a certain extent, we already couldn't get back to where we are. Right? We'd find it hard to.
Exactly.
Like it's
hard to build bridges.
There's probably only specific people in the world that could reinvent a computer chip, if you know what I mean.
From scratch, with zero knowledge.
We'd all know that there's a thing. You can imagine, like, if we got wiped out to like 1,000 people or something, it would sound like gods. You'd be like, no, we used to be able to, we had the things, and they would communicate over vast differences, and things would happen. Like the machines could do that. Like nah, mate. Like 100 years later, they're just like, nah, that's just nonsense. That's just religion.
Yeah.
It would just be written off as like something that never happened. But I don't know. Maybe in 1,000 years, they'll be saying there's a Clancy's Fish pub. It was used to inspire people to sit in a van and bollock on about AI, whatever that is.
I think that's a nice way to wrap. No? I mean, maybe we need to just bake in Conspiracy Corner. I'm just going to steal that from like another podcast that I listen to occasionally. Like bake in Conspiracy Corner.
I have Science Corner.
Yeah, that's Science Corner.
No, it's like fun stuff to think about. Like, it's Yeah.
There's no
I
Xbox
guess
and
like, we
ABC.
did talk about aliens for a moment.
Aliens was baked into that conversation, yeah. But I'm with you.
All right then. In that case, that's the good stuff.